Hey, welcome back to Well, That's Interesting. The, would you look at that, edition. Today is episode 205. This desert beetle may save humanity when water runs out, and this 7,000-year-old indigenous myth may be a true account. My friends, I'm going to ask you a few questions that are right now probably a little silly for many of the people listening in. Did you have any water today? Did you have any coffee, tea, or a soft drink? Did you eat anything today? And I ask that one because water was probably an ingredient. When you turned on the tap in your kitchen or bathroom, did it work? Let's call this series of questions Situation A. And now I'm going to ask a few questions that I'd like to call Situation B. Did you line up for water today? How many hours did it take you? Did you meet your daily ration for gallons used? Have you received a message from your local authorities asking for patience as they divert resources to other parts of the state or country, and that you'll get water back in a few days? Well, my alert business goose, some of you may already know. Situation A and Situation B are happening in the same timeline. They're both happening right now to separate groups of people. But what's truly uncomfortable and frightening of all is that finding yourself in Situation A and then finding yourself in Situation B is really only a few months apart. For example, Mexico City, North America's largest metropolis, is facing the exhaustion of the Cutzamala aqueduct system, which brings its 22 million residents up to 25% of their water from reservoirs across the surrounding country of Mexico. Quote, "Climate change is changing the likelihood of these extreme events," said Sarah Kapnick, chief scientist at the U.S. National Oceanic and Atmospheric Administration, to Scientific American. But, my friends, climate change is just one piece of a puzzle that's falling apart for many cities around the world. Unstoppable population growth and failing infrastructure are others. Mexico City is facing a population boom at the same time the Cutzamala aqueduct system is running dry. Structurally, the city itself is actually a floating city. It was built upon its own aquifer. So, quote, "The more the aquifer dries up, the more Mexico City sinks," said Juan Bezori, Mexico country representative at the Nature Conservancy to Scientific American. He then went on to say, quote, "Some parts of the city are sinking by up to 20 inches a year. Mexico City is already pumping more than twice the water from the aquifer that can be replaced by surface water infiltration." End quote. Shit. My friends, if you head on over to our social media stuffs and tap on today's post, you will see a photo of a woman in her kitchen in the Las Piñas, nailed it, neighborhood of Mexico City. She's using one of two water cooler-sized jugs to clean her home and most likely cook with and do all the things you do with water, like fucking survive. That photo was taken on February 27th of this year. Local CBS News contributor Enrique Avesito told CBS News reporter Lee Cohen, quote, "Many have already gone days, if not weeks, without running water in their houses," end quote. But don't worry, though. Don't worry. It gets worse. Cape Town, South Africa's 4.5 million people have been battling all the same issues since 2018. And not one piece of the puzzle has been solved yet. Because of this, quote, "Thousands of people have been lining up for whatever water they can get as the extreme heat shrinks their reservoirs, and decades of neglect have allowed infrastructure to crumble." Local officials have said that if conservation efforts are not escalated soon, they could face a total collapse of the water system. Sicily is also facing diminishing supplies. Quote, "There is no water," said Rosaria, a resident of Agrigento. Another local, Antonio, told the outlet that it's been a long-standing issue. Water in Agrigento is gold. End quote. All of this from Lee Cohen of CBS News. That was hard to say, and I could see the look on your face from here. It's, yeah. I think I know what you're thinking. You're thinking, well, luckily, no one's ever fought over gold, and, we're all good here, right? In the States, I mean, we might end up in autocracy after the election, but we've got water, though, right? Sure, we're good. If you think San Diego importing 85% of its water supply is good, or that Lake Mead, America's largest reservoir, serving the states of Arizona, California, and Nevada, drying up by 4 trillion gallons and has fallen to record new lows, is good. Or that Colorado, New Mexico, Utah, and Wyoming are in a legal fucking battle with California, Arizona, and Nevada over the last ounces of the Colorado River is good. Then yeah, baby, we're all good. In the first half of the show, a hero. And sometimes not all heroes wear capes. Some stick their butt in the air, which seemingly magically becomes bespeckled with water droplets. Yes, my thirsty business goose. We're going to talk about the Namib desert beetle. Specifically, its body design and how physicists and researchers around the globe are fascinated by how it so efficiently grabs water out of thin air. It might just help us. Then after the break, we are leaving water for fire, but sticking with tales of survival. One of the oldest myths on Earth may actually be a true human experience. The Gugu Badhun Aboriginal people of Australia have a tale that's literally thousands of years old, and thanks to a group of geologists and a fancy-pants rock dating technique, we now know that story was more than a story. It's very likely a true account of their people surviving a volcanic eruption. We will tell that tale. We will get into the study which lines up the account to the actual eruption, and you gotta hear this. In the meantime, I'm Jill Chacha, and if this is your first time listening, welcome to the flock. My rumbling business goose. To begin, I'm going to need you to pack some serious sunglasses, a hefty amount of sunscreen, and ironically, as much water as your little hands can carry, because we're heading on over to a not-so-little place called the Namib Desert. And for my fellow geographically challenged Americans who are already struggling with the hottest summer on record so far and are not so keen on traveling to a desert, get this. At the time I'm writing these notes, on July 19th, it's actually cooler in this African desert than most parts of our country. It's currently 81 degrees Fahrenheit there. And for context, most of the mainland USA has been well over 90 degrees Fahrenheit this past week. So rejoice. We're heading to Africa, and specifically to a monumental stretch of desert that's monumental in every sense of the word. My friends, please imagine South Africa. Fantastic. Now point to it and move your finger up along the west coast. All right, there you go. Keep going. Keep going. Now you're in Namibia. Fantastic. No, don't stop. Keep going. Keep going up along the coast. Now you're in Angola. Okay, stop. Perfect. Right there. And congratulations. We just traveled over 2,000 kilometers or 1,200 miles along the Atlantic coast. And if we took some detours, we could have found ourselves as much as 120 miles inland. So, it's big. And a water source here barely exists. Throughout its massive expanse, you'll only get, on average, somewhere between 0.2 of an inch to 3.5 inches of precipitation a year, making it one of the driest places on Earth. And these conditions have existed for roughly 55 to 80 million years. 80 million years. Put a pin in that. Now, the lack of water could certainly kill you, but good news. There's way more here that can get the job done. The sand dunes reach heights of 300 meters or 980 feet tall and can span 32 kilometers or 20 miles long, making them the second largest in the world. No. It's these heights and lengths combined with the colliding cold and warm fronts from the ocean that creates a fog belt that frequently envelops hundreds of miles. Coastal regions can experience more than 180 days of thick fog a year. And when I say thick, I mean it. The fog has proven itself to be such a hazard to incoming and docking ships that the shoreline's nickname is Skeleton Coast. Skeleton Coast is so badass. I want to see that movie. I want to go to that theme park. But I do not want to go to that place. Thousands of wrecks have occurred here. So, what could possibly call this home? If you said a tiny beetle no larger than an inch, you're right. My crispy business goose, it's my honor to introduce a species called Stenocara gracilipus, aka the Namib desert beetle, and its luscious rear end may just help solve our water crisis. My friends, head on over to our social media stuffs and tap on today's post. Swipe past the informative graphic that shows the location and the expanse of this desert, and you shall see our shapely little friend. I'll give you a sec. Yeah, it resembles your average black beetle, but if you squint and take a gander at its backside, and I know you want to, you'll notice a few unusual things. One, it's rather large in proportion to the rest of it, and two, it's textured. Okay, now put a pin in this, and I want you to unpin that first pin from before. Okay, now, the oldest beetle fossils date back to around 295 million years ago, so the Namib Desert beetle has been around long enough to evolve and ingeniously adapt to these hot, dry, yet foggy conditions. To survive, it does a little something called fog basking. And it's exactly what it sounds like, and this beetle does it better than anyone. Its first step in hydration is to find one of those colossal sand dunes, where, with its tiny legs, it crawls to the top. Facing the breeze, it angles its body about 45 degrees, where that rear end, what's called its elytra, a shell containing its wings, is propped up against the sky. There it waits for the fog to roll in. My friends, let's pause here for a moment. If you ever walked through fog, you've probably noticed that your clothes get kind of damp, right? Like your skin, too. And if you're long enough in it, you become a bit soaked and it's uncomfortable. It's a goddamn soggy mess. Well, be prepared to get not a little, but a lot jealous. Please, once again, head on over to our social media stuffs and check out a close-up of a Namib beetle after successfully fog basking. I'll give you a sec. Now, if it looks to you as though it's covered in clear, perfectly circular jewels, like this thing is bedazzled, bejeweled, you are absolutely right. These are dozens and dozens of water droplets, which will roll down this creature's body and into its mouth. This beetle is so successful at this process that up to 12% of its total body weight is gained by fog basking alone. Wind does not blow these droplets away, nor do they roll off its shell and into the sand. Not one drop, not one jewel is wasted. So how in the holy hell does this bug seemingly reach into the air with its butt and grab perfect water droplets? And not only that, how are these drops rolling straight into its mouth? How are they guided? If these thoughts crossed your mind, you're not alone. Hunter King, a physicist at the University of Akron in Ohio, and his colleagues were like, what the fuck is going on here? And also, this could be pretty goddamn useful. We should look into it. And so they did. Thanks to leaps and bounds in 3D printing, King and his team recreated several elytra with varying surface textures, some bumpy, grooved, and others smooth. Now, each of these was then placed in a specifically designed wind tunnel to see how much water they could grab out of the fog rolling in. So, what did they find? Drum roll, please. Thank you in the back. Quote, they found that bumpy surfaces were fog magnets. A sphere with 1 millimeter lumps, or lumps a mere 4/100ths of an inch on its surface, caught droplets with nearly 2.5 times the efficiency of a smooth sphere with the same surface area. End quote. From Ava Frederick of ScienceMagazine.com. Well, needless to say, you can grab a lot of fucking water droplets on an even smaller surface covered in wee 4/100ths of an inch wide bumps. This is looking great. But how do you not lose them? How do they not roll off? For this question, King and the gang reached out to Mattia Gazzola and his graduate student, Van Kiat Chan. Nailed it. At the University of Illinois in Urbana. Turns out, Mattia and Fan, they're just hot for hydrodynamic situations. And they look for answers on things like animal movement on a microscopic level in their lab. This is what they do. Now, the two researchers accepted King's challenge and, quote, created a computer model to see how different hydrodynamic forces acting on water droplets made them more or less likely to stick to a sphere's textured surface. This was their day. Continuing the quote, one important factor was how lubricated the surface is, the team discovered. If there's always a thin layer of water, droplets were less likely to stick to it. And the microscopic texture of the surface, how smooth or rough it was on the micrometer level, also influenced the behavior of droplets. End quote from Science Magazine. So my friends, there's so much going on here. Long story short, creating a surface where an exceptionally tiny area needs to be hydrophilic or attracts water, right next to an exceptionally tinier area that needs to be hydrophobic or repels water, and arranging them in such a way as to guide and prevent water loss is difficult. But good news. For real. This study took place in 2019. And since then, we've learned a hell of a lot more about the Namib desert beetle. And we don't have to wait nearly 300 million years to reproduce what it has. Let's talk more about its life-giving rear end, shall we? Water droplets. Let's all start with water droplets in the fog. As small as 15 to 20 micrometers in diameter are all it takes for its hydrophilic bumps to attract them. And for context, 20 micrometers is smaller than a white blood cell, so copying the size of these bumps is key. Also key, those bumps are surrounded by waxy hydrophobic troughs through which larger water droplets are guided. But how do those initial droplets get rolling? How do they grow? If you ask that, great question. Quote, droplets flatten as they make contact with the hydrophilic surfaces, preventing them from being blown by the wind and providing a surface for other droplets to attach. Accumulation continues until the combined droplet weight overcomes the water's electrostatic attraction to the bumps as well as any opposing force of wind. In a 30-kilometer or 19-mile-per-hour breeze, such a droplet would stick to the wing until it grows to roughly 5 millimeters or 0.2 of an inch in diameter. At that point, it'll roll down the beetle's back into its mouth parts. End quote. From the wiki. My impressed business goose, that was a lot. But yes, this bug, with its bumpy butt, can attract a year's worth of rain in one delicious rolling droplet. And two, yes, now that we know how this beetle alternates its hydrophilic and phobic bumps and valleys, we can get cracking. We can make stuff. Ideas range from producing a material for refugee tents that could catch water droplets from the wind, to water harvesting roof tiles, to a bottle that could refill itself using the air around it. Quote, this startup, NBD Nano, is developing a water-collecting bottle using the same biologically inspired technology. This self-filling vessel will be pulling 3 liters of water from the air per hour, although this will no doubt depend on various environmental factors, not least of which being air humidity. Though still only at the developmental stage for their first product, the small company has other applications in mind, including portable water for desert projects, water for greenhouses, and solutions for countries in which access to drinkable water is scarce. End quote. From savethewater.org. Solutions for countries and megacities like Mexico City is hard to say and no easy task. Luckily, NBD Nano is not alone. MIT is working on this. So, let's watch this space like our lives depend on it. And thank you, little Namib desert beetle. After the break, we're moving on from fire. Sorry, delete. We're moving on from water to fire. I'm getting ahead of myself. And we're moving on from the future to the past. Next up, how preserved oral traditions and modern technology can work together to uncover Earth's mysterious past. This is so cool. I'm pumped. You gotta stay tuned. Stay tuned.
Sick of those trivia podcasts that you don't even understand how to operate and they just have too many levers and buttons?
There's got to be a better way.
Now there is, with Good Job Brain, an offbeat quiz show and trivia podcast that makes learning new things easy and fun.
I just learned that artificial vanilla flavoring sometimes comes from the anal glands of a beaver, and now I can never shake that mental image. Thanks, Good Job Brain.
Good Job Brain is available for the low price of just 4 easy payments of free. It's a podcast.
Good Job Brain is part of Airwave Media and available on all podcast apps. Operators are standing by.
Hey there, I'm Dylan Lewis, one of the hosts of Motley Fool Money. Each weekday on Motley Fool Money, we talk through the business news you need to know and the stories moving stocks on Wall Street. On weekends, we dive into the industries shaping tomorrow and host the experts, authors, and executives that understand them. Tune in for insights, a long-term perspective on investing, and of course, stock ideas. Plenty of them. To quote a listener, it pays to listen. Check us out and subscribe wherever you listen to podcasts.
And we're back. We are so back. And my friends, get this. Despite Australia being home to 66 venomous snakes and the blue-ringed octopus, which is one of the world's most venomous sea creatures, saltwater crocodiles, stonefish, great white sharks, and the redback spider, also known as the Australian black widow, and every jellyfish in the waters around it being venomous as well, I have good news. None of these animals can hold a candle to Australia's volcanoes. Yes, you heard me. Australia also has volcanoes, and it's been these babies who've been the real danger to human inhabitants. Quote, when people think of Australia, volcanoes are probably not the first thing that springs to mind, but they are actually more common than people realize. For example, there are nearly 400 volcanic vents in North Queensland, which erupted over the last few million years, and Kinrara is one of the most recent, end quote, said Dr. Benjamin Cohen of the University of Glasgow and the Scottish University's Environmental Research Centre, or CSIRC for short. So, my anxious yet adventurous business goose, you know what that means. We're heading on over to the Kinrara Crater, located in Kinrara National Park, preserving a wee 70,000 acres. And for my fellow geographically challenged Americans who are so stoked about this and are wondering where this may be, don't worry, I've got you. Please imagine Australia. Perfect, thank you. Now point to the very northeast corner, the top right, just before the shoreline. And there you have it, that's it. Here we are in the Australian state of North Queensland, and standing just a few yards from one of the country's youngest volcanoes. If you head on over to our social media stuffs and swipe past our drippy Beetle friend, you'll see an aerial shot of its 1,000-foot in diameter crater and a side view of this literal baby, geologically speaking. Not only does it lay claim to be the youngest, it just so happens to be the site of the last volcanic eruptions on the continent too. So, stick a big old pin in these facts, breathe a sigh of relief, and sit back and relax. Like Dr. Benny there from the University of Glasgow. Swipe past the photos of Kinrara, and you'll see him having a good sit right in front of the thing. He's just sitting there with a smile. Just ignore the steam rising from the crater, I guess. Rather, just concentrate on the stories I'm about to retell. Stories that have been passed down at least 230 generations. 230. Making these stories older than even the oldest written historical records of Egypt or Mesopotamia. Today, now you are part of that tradition. The stories belong to the Gugu Badhan people, indigenous to this area, and the first story I'm going to tell is their creation story. Their creation story of Numanali, the bronzed winged pigeon, Bunbunba, the pheasant, and the entire Gugu Badhan landscape. As legend has it, 20,000 years ago, the lava flow from Kinrara created these creatures and, quote, the mountains, valleys, and the permanent spring-fed creeks that are the beginning and the source of the Burdekin River, the life-giver to the Gugu Badhan plants and animals. The upper Burdekin, or the Black Burdekin River, gave sustenance and life to country and our people for millennia. The same ecology and natural resources that supported and maintained the Gugu Badhan people for thousands of years were also what attracted the colonizers. The permanent spring-fed creeks, lagoons, and open grassy woodlands of the area were regarded as prime cattle grazing country. And in the late 1800s, the pastoralists moved in. End quote. From kinraraexpeditions.com.au. Now, before we move on to the next oral tradition, this is probably a good time to mention another type of history. The Gugu Badhan were the first inland Aboriginal nations in northern Australia to encounter Europeans. The extremely German Ludwig Leichhardt's primary exploratory party in 1845 pretty much just opened the floodgates to other, air quotes, explorers. In the 1860s, just 20 years later, the native police were created, and they attempted to violently, quote, clear out Gugu Badhan to make way for more settlers. However, Quote, "The scrubby landscape meant that Gugubatun were able to resist these incursions for approximately 20 years, but to no avail. Eventually, though, many Gugubatun people came back in and worked on cattle stations, and contemporary Gugubatun people maintained strong relationships with pastoral families in the region." End quote. Now, that went by pretty quickly, but honestly, a very real, long story short, the Gugubatun fought and persisted to remain in existence. I'm damn happy to report that they hold a native title over approximately 6,500 square kilometers or 2,500 square miles of this region, and formed the Gugubatun Aboriginal Corporation. It took decades to do this, and part of the victory was thanks to visibility, which attempted to undo the damage of being seen and labeled as lesser than or other. Social anthropologists and linguists like Peter Sutton and Aboriginal activists like Dick Houlihan joined together to not only advance their rights, but to preserve their language, customs, and culture by doing something as simple as making audio recordings. Which brings us to these oral traditions. This one, not one of creation, but one of destruction. Events that the Gugubatun supposedly experienced about 7,000 years ago. Quote, "One tradition recounts the earth being on fire along the watercourses, while a second tradition tells of a time when a witch doctor made a pit in the ground and lots of dust in the air. People got lost in the dust and died." End quote. From Dr. Benny's study titled Holocene Neogen Volcanism in Northern Australia, a Chronology and Eruption History. This rolls right off the tongue. My friends, one fine day, Dr. Benny came across an audio recording of a Gugubatun elder telling these stories. A recording made back in the 1970s. And his geological sense started tingling. What if, he thought, what if this story is true? What if the Gugubatun people witnessed a volcanic eruption? By looking at rock samples from Kinrara's lava flow, we could find a potential link between Kinrara and these stories. Well, Dr. Benny's team, made of rock lovers from the University of St. Andrews, the Australian National University, and James Cook University, they didn't need much convincing to collect samples from the 34-mile-long lava flow, 34 miles, to perform some clickety-clack calculations. So, what tools did they use and what did they find? Drum roll, please. Thank you again. The researchers used a technique known as argon-argon geochronology to learn more about the age of the volcano. It's a real thing. And what the hell is it? Okay, I got you. Argon-argon geochronology, basically, quote, is a noble gas mass spectrometer. Don't worry. Don't worry. Basically, continuing the quote, they could measure the amount of argon built up from the natural radioactive decay of potassium, allowing them to determine how much time has passed since the volcano erupted. The team's measurements allowed them to date the Kinrara eruption to 7,000 years ago, with the possibility that it may have been up to 2,000 years further back or forward in time. End quote. From the University of Glasgow News, where Benny added, quote, "These stories are plausible descriptions of a volcanic eruption. The Kinrara volcano has a very prominent crater, or a hole which produced volcanic ash and lava fountains. The lavas from the volcano flowed 55 kilometers or 34 miles down the surrounding stream and river valleys, and it would have looked very much like the earth was burning. The mention of people dying in the dust, potentially volcanic ash, may be significant, as it could indicate noxious gas emissions during the eruption or asphyxiation in the gas." End quote. So my friends, This is pretty extraordinary evidence that supports the idea that the Gugu Baden were around to witness this eruption. And I've got a plot twist for you. Unpin that pin from the beginning of this segment, the one where I introduced Kinrara as the continent's youngest volcano and the last eruption. Those facts are thanks to this study, all to this study, thanks to the Gugu Baden stories, passed down 230 generations, the recordings and preservation of them in the 1970s, and the curiosity of modern researchers today. Thanks to all of this, we have a better picture of the world around us. We have those facts. So if you're thinking, damn, that's pretty cool, and maybe we should look into other Indigenous stories and accounts, you are absolutely right. The team suggests that, quote, a worthwhile topic for future research should be to further examine Aboriginal verbal traditions for features that may describe eruptions, which may reveal information about these volcanoes, as well as the longevity and the detail of the verbal traditions themselves. End quote. Woo! My friends, let me tell you what. There is a long list of geological events within Aboriginal stories all over the world that not only include volcanoes, but ones about how the sea level rose around 10,000 years ago. There's a lot, and we should look into it like our life depends on it. Thank you for listening, rating, subscribing, leaving a review. I read all of them, and they're so fucking heartfelt and wonderful. Thank you. Thank you so much for leaving reviews. Thank you for telling your friends about how we're all going to die. I mean, but we can prevent that from being sooner and more later, if thanks to a beetle. Anyway, you know the story. You just tell them the story. Tell them about the 7,000-year-old myth. That's a true thing. So, by telling them these stuff, you're part of the solution and the problem. Who knows? And a magma-filled thanks to the folks over at Airwave Media, the podcast network to which WTI belongs. If you love this show, and you do, you love the other podcasts in this family. So please, stay interesting.